Hello and welcome back to AEF TV in association with Engerati. I'm joined now by Dr. Benon Mutambi, who is the CEO of the Electricity Regulatory, I find that hard to say, I'm going to say it again, the Electricity Regulatory Authority of Uganda. Firstly, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to be here.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
You're welcome. You're most welcome. And just to get straight into it, because we're pressed for time, you've got other people to meet. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, I've had a number of people sat in this chair who are power developers, financiers and everything, and we need a transparent regulatory framework. And if we've got all of that, then the deals and the money and the willingness is there to come. Now, in your position as being in charge of the regulator, would you say that that is true?
That is partly true. A stable, predictable regulatory framework is very important to the investors. It assures the investors of their recovery of their invested capital, but also it gives them assurance that they will earn their reasonable return on investment and that their investment is safe and over the period of the contract. So I think the statement is correct, partly, but there are, of course, other considerations because you cannot ignore the aspect of the policy side. The investors equally want to see a stable policy framework in place as well. So the regulatory framework complements the policy side of things. But I agree that it's partly true because I think outside there, capital is not the problem. The capital is there. Capital is looking for where it can earn the highest returns, and investors are always looking around to see where they can earn the highest returns.
Right.
And they want that kind of assurance that when they put their money here, that their funds are going to be safe, that they will actually be able to earn the return for that is reasonable over a period of time, and that their investments are safe. So we as regulators, we play quite a significant role in that regard. For instance, an investor would want to be assured that the regulator would be in a position to set a tariff that is cost reflective, that is cost recovery. But sometimes we as regulators, we also tend to get drawn into concerns over affordability, the public cannot afford, and then
you have that political element as well.
There is a political element as well, the social element. Now, when a regulator gets attracted to that, that is not giving confidence to the other stakeholder with the investors. So as regulators, we must be prepared to always balance the interest of these stakeholders. Most importantly,
you're balancing those
yes,
two areas.
Yes, we have to do the balancing act, balance the interest of the consumer, the interest of government, and the interest of the investors. Because if we don't do that and we concentrate on the consumers and the government and ignore the investors' interests, then capital is not going to flow in.
And how hard is it to get that framework in place? I mean, can you share some of the stories of, maybe your personal ones with the time in office or Uganda's in general in terms of, what's the challenge of creating that framework? Because you mentioned the political side.
Yes.
And that political side is also evident in the UK, so that's not an African problem, that's the global problem. How do you create a framework that is able to balance those three constituencies you mentioned?
I wouldn't say from my experience that it's that easy to create, but at the same time, it's not insurmountable to create. I think a regulator can always create that framework, but certain things must be in place. The regulator must always ensure that, first of all your actions, all your decisions are transparent and are supported with justifications. You must always ensure that you build a strong technical team in order to,
How do you guys do that? How do you guys show that transparency?
Oh, yeah. To be able to show the transparency in your decision making as a regulator, you must always have a framework for stakeholder consultations. You must always make sure that stakeholders are consulted. You must make sure that important information is available, publicly available on your websites, for example, and that the public can always get the information. They need to know how you make decisions, how you arrive at certain decisions, what informed certain decisions. The public needs to know. And as a regulator, you must be mindful of that. You must always make sure that that is being done. Once you do that, that is going to enhance the credibility in the regulatory regime, and that is also going to improve the legitimacy of the regulatory regime. So I would like to say that as a regulator, you must always make sure that whatever you do is predictable, because investors want a predictable regulatory regime.
Right.
They do not want to see you doing this today, and tomorrow you are handling it this way, and the other day you have already changed.
So in terms of that predictability,
yes.
let me just put in the other thing, which is kind of coming out. So, regulators maybe, or regulatory environments should be in play for 10, 15 years and have that sort of predictability. Unfortunately, the political environment doesn't work like that. So how do you decouple that from the regulatory environment? What needs to be done to have that decoupling?
From my experience, what I would like to share with you that as a regulator, once you build a strong technical team, a competent technical staff, and once you ensure that you build in a strong, transparent mechanism for your decision making, the political side will always respect what you are doing. And once you are open to consultations, because that's what the political leadership wants. The political leadership, remember, is not detached from the consumers, because the consumers are the voters. Once the consumers are happy, the political leadership is likely to be happy. So you must make sure that your consultative process addresses the consumers as well as the political leadership. Whenever you are making the consumer happy, remember you are making the politician happy. So you should never forget about that.
But then again, you still have the power investors, right? So you still got that balancing act to play.
Yes. I think in consultation and trying to make them happy does not mean that you forget about the investors. All you need to know, as I said, make sure that you always have good justifications underlying your decisions, and make sure that when you are consulting, you go out with those reasons, with those justifications, and table it to the other group of the stakeholders. And convince them, show them where you are coming from, the basis of your decision. And if you don't make that decision, what would happen? Okay.
Yeah, so you're dealing in facts. You're trying to
remove
with the facts. Subjectivity.
Absolutely. You are dealing with facts. You are trying to remove subjectivity. You are not trying to, to play a game of being liked.
And how important do you also think is, in this mix to create this environment where you can be predictable, like you said earlier on, and so on, is the fact that you need to maybe look at the laws of the country in place. Is there a need to sort of look at some of the legal framework and so on? When we had one of the other regulators in place, they said, well, when we looked at it, we actually felt we needed to tweak the laws of the country to ensure that we can get that predictability. Do you think that's an important part, or is it being made more important than it needs to be?
I think the starting point is always the law. You must always have an enabling legal framework in place that can support whatever you are going to do, whether it's transparency, whether it's independence. You need that regulatory framework in place. You don't need to start tweaking the regulatory framework along the way. You only need it. It's a precondition for the success of any regulatory regime. So you must always have that legal framework in place first that can enable you to do your work. But if I can take you a little bit backwards on the issue of what you said, what our experience is as Uganda in trying to build a transparent and credible regulatory framework that can be conducive to attractive to the investors. My experience is that one area where we as regulators we tend to have challenges is the coming out and increasing the tariff cost reflective levels. I
Right.
think that has been my experience. We tend sometimes also to fail to detach ourselves as consumers of electricity from ourselves as regulators. But in Uganda, we did it. We actually increased the electricity prices in 2012 by 46%, and that is quite high by
So
your standards.
how did you do that?
We engaged in a consultative process of 6 months. We knew it was never going to be easy, so
Yes.
we had to give sufficient time to consultations. And we moved out and consulted with the political leadership, with the consumers, engaged. They even took us to court. We said, fine, we shall still talk to you,
Yes.
even when we are in court. Then later on, they withdrew the court case.
Yes, yeah.
And finally, they understood where we are coming from. But I would like you to know that what helped in that whole process was the transparency of the regulatory regime. Because we said we have nothing tied. These are the models for setting the tariff. These are the assumptions. They are open to you. They are open to the public. Come and check. Look at it. Tell us what you think we can do.
Take us to court if you like.
Take
You
us
know,
to court
we
if you
can have
like.
it. Yeah.
Whatever we are trying to do is in the best interest of you, is in the best interest of the country. There are no selfish interests. And we were understood, and it worked.
Excellent.
So, yes, it can always be done. That's what I wanted to say.
So when you went down that journey as well in terms of cost-effective tariffs, which I'm glad you brought that up. Did you also then have to look at creating a framework and saying, well, okay, industry can afford more than maybe an individual, and I would imagine your 46% is an aggregate figure, right? Maybe not for
Yes,
everybody.
yes.
So how did you sort of deal with those various constituencies? Because again, you will have very poor communities and rich communities, and how do you go about creating that landscape?
Actually, you are very right. For the industries, the increase was 69%. For the domestic consumers,
Right.
households, the increase was around 36%. So
Right.
more increase was towards the industries, and lesser increase was towards the household consumers.
And the quid pro quo for industry is that if you pay more, we will give you more reliable power. And
That is always very extremely important, because what the industrial consumer is paying for is reliability. Is the power must be always on, because if it's not on, it imposes a much higher cost on his industrial processes than even the increase in the price.
so has
So
your
you have-
reliability curve followed that price increase? Are they happy with the reliability?
Yes, that's what we had to do as a regulator. We have to make sure that after that price increase, we assure the industries that the reliability will improve. And we have now, we as regulators go and review our minimum quality of supply standards, benchmarks, and sit with the utilities and enforce compliance on the side of utilities and ensure that these utilities improved on their reliability of supply. So it's always, you can increase the price, but as long as you assure the consumer that reliability will also fall and improve, you always have something to bargain with to table on the side of the consumers.
Understood. As we're coming to the end of our time here, and I feel like we could actually go on for a lot longer, but we don't have that much time. I wanted to bring up another subject and ask you as a regulator whether you think that there is a role to be played. There are a number of companies and there are a number of case studies down here at AEF on the exhibition floor where technology companies are making a direct contract with the community to provide power, usually renewables and so on, inside a microgrid, etc. And it seems to me that those things are kind of bypassing everything else because there's a desire for that power. Do you, as a regulator, feel that you have a role to play within those arrangements? Because, and these are my words, that I sometimes feel that if you're buying something and you don't really understand it, you may be buying the wrong thing.
Yeah. I would like to say that new technologies are good, or they should be encouraged, and regulation should not stand in the way of innovation. So regulation should in one way or another support innovation. On the other hand, these are new technologies, they are not tested, and we do not know how they work. So it's always important that the aspect of standards is critically considered as you bring on board new technologies. So somebody must be in a position to regulate the aspect of standards. Right. It could be the regulator, it could be a national institution in charge of standards, but these standards must be regulated. Even the national institution in charge of standards may not on its own regulate these standards without the regulator who regulates that specific industry. So I would emphasize that for new technologies, the concentration should be on the aspect, especially for the small microgrids, the concentration of regulation should be largely on the standards. Right. These technologies will later on expand and become big. And at that particular moment, at that particular time, then regulation can be full-blown to literally protect the public against prices, against other aspects. But initially it should be on standards.
That makes sense because of the, otherwise it gets quite complex. And just to wrap up in a time here, we are at AEF and it's been a very busy conference. What are some of the conversations that you found encouraging, or maybe even some of the conversations where you're going, look, I can't believe we're still having this conversation. So just to get your view about your experience here.
It's an interesting forum. It brings together investors and technology manufacturers and regulators and utilities together. So it's quite an interesting forum. I find it a good forum for sharing of new developments in the areas of technology, advancements in the areas of regulation, in the areas of utility management. And to be honest, I myself wasn't aware that actually the prices of solar had gone that low. And it was quite interesting to learn, for instance, that solar prices have even surpassed the grid parity.
They're very low.
Yes, and that now solar PV is highly competitive with the usual conventional technologies. Yeah. And I think those are the benefits of such a forum.
Well, it's one of those.
But it's also well attended. Yes.
Yeah. And it's also one of those things with solar. It's a technology play. And it'll follow some sort of, a bit like Moore's law with chipsets. You can almost expect that price to continue to drop and drop and drop, which is interesting. Puts a different mix in play.
Yeah. But also the other interesting aspect of such a kind of forum is that we are able to listen to the success stories in those who have done it well. They are showcasing their success stories, and the benchmarking is possible now. Yeah. It's feasible. You are able to go back and make corrections in your processes. So, for instance, there are quite a number of countries that are being successful on their attracting IPPs. South Africa, Uganda ourselves, we are doing quite well in the area of attracting IPPs. And yesterday it came out that so far Uganda has the highest number of IPPs in sub-Saharan Africa, in South Africa.
That's excellent. How many have you got?
We have around 21 IPPs.
Right.
Yeah. So I find it interesting. Now I know where we fall.
Yes.
And it gives me comfort and confidence to go back and continue to improve the regulatory framework and attract more and more of this.
Excellent. And on that note, we'll leave it. We'll come to the end of our time. Thank you for making the time to be here, and thank you as well for watching. This has been another broadcast for AEF TV in association with Engerati from AEF 2015 in Dubai.
Thank you very much.